In this video, I will be covering the basic concepts of the Stat Manager component. The Stat Manager component is simply a component you can drag onto any actor, and it will immediately have replicated runtime collection of any int, float, or string that you'd like to assign to it. It stores these int, float, and string stats as a name and value pair, so as long as you can remember the name of the stat you want to look up or save, you can easily fetch or manipulate that value in the future. Now, the Stat Manager component does not handle persistent saving of stats, so if you want to save and reload this through multiple gameplay sessions, this isn't the component for you. But if you're looking to just simply store, say, like a record of kills and deaths per player, you can drag this component on your player state, for example, and have immediate access to arbitrary stat collection. So let's take a look at how this works. In the example content provided, we have a cube that all it is just a cube, and if we open up its blueprint, we see that when it's hit, it increments a stat called boops. That's right. You can boop it, and it will record the number of boops that have been booped. For example, here we see that this cube has been booped 6 times, and this value is replicated to everybody on the server that you're playing with. And we're also tracking another stat called last boop interval, which is simply the time it took between the second to last boop and the most recent boop, just in case you want to see an example of that. Now, this stat called boops doesn't really exist in anything except this blueprint. The Stat Manager component has no concept of this stat, and it is added at runtime here. As we can see, when you increment an int stat, or you can just set a stat, either int, float, or string, all you need to do is supply it a name and the value or amount in case you're incrementing. If you want to fetch that value at any time, you can just simply drag out from the Stat Manager component reference and say get int stat, and again supply it a name. And optionally, you can supply a default value if the stat has a sort of a default value that you want, just in case this object doesn't have that stat to begin with. For example, if you have an unbooped cube, there's no reason to store a stat called boops if it simply has never been booped, because if you just grab that stat from it later, you'll simply just get the default value of 0. Now, you can use this again for all sorts of things. I primarily use it for, again, tracking kills and deaths in a generic shooter. But that's really all this component does, is it simply stores ints and floats. Now, you can predefine some stats if you'd like by using the config stats arrays here. For example, in this example, boops is predefined to a value of 0, but this is completely optional. You do not have to predefine any stat. And there are also various events that you can hook into on this component as well. For example, if you're on the server, you can hook into these explicit stat change events so that you can listen for when an int stat has changed. And a reason for this is maybe you're on the server and you want to react to a player scoring a kill. You can hook into the Stat Manager, and when the Stat Manager sees that the kill count has changed, you can execute some arbitrary logic there. Or if you're interested when any stat has changed, either for UI purposes or you're just interested in a stat change on both the server and the client, there's an event for on any stat has changed. And again, simply put, when any stat changes, this event will fire and you can react to that accordingly. Now, if you have your own stat collection implementation and you want to be compatible with this interface, or you want multiple ways of pulling and reading stats, the Stat Manager component is essentially just an interface wrapper. And this interface that it wraps has all these basic int, float, string, stat requirements. And if you want to eventually move into another backend or something that has its own stats, you can easily migrate from this component to that system as long as you implement the given interface in that new system. Now, there are some advanced features as well, such as allowing clients to edit stats locally or allowing clients to request stat changes to the server. And those are all configured here in the config variables. The first variable here being client settable stat names. Any stat name provided in this set will allow clients to be able to manipulate this stat directly. Otherwise, when a client manipulates a stat, if the client tries to tell the server to change that stat, the server will simply reject it. This is very important if you're tracking something like kill count, as you don't want clients overriding kill counts and having the server just blindly accept that change, because then people will cheat and your game will not be very great. On the other hand, if you want to have clients keep track of stat changes locally, you can enable that as well with this be allow client-side local stat change. If a stat name is provided in this set and this bool here is flipped to true in the config, then you can have clients track their own stats locally, and those might be good for stats such as accuracy or any type of client-side stat that doesn't really matter in the end, but it's nice for the client to be able to tell, to just add value to your game, but again, isn't too critically important to be server authenticated. And all stats, whether they're client set or server set, based on your config here, will be replicated to everyone else as well. And that is the premise of the Stat Manager component. Again, all it does is it handles ints, floats, and strings for you. It replicates them across the network, emits events when they need emitted, and that's it. You can drag this onto any actor, and voila. Now, if you're in a separate actor and you want to find the stat manager inside another actor, a helper function is also provided to you called getActorStatInterface. You can call this function from any blueprint, and it will attempt to find the stat interface of that actor. So for this cube, for example, if you supply it that cube, it will drill down into that cube and find the component, so you can work with the component directly and call things like get or set int stat if you'd like. Again, just a little helper convenience method so that you can kind of manipulate stats from anywhere. And a further advanced concept, if you're in a situation where you need a static replicated actor in the scene that manages stats as opposed to a component, provided is a stat manager rep actor helper. Now, this actor, all it does is it wraps the stat interface and feeds all your requests to a component that's in it. But this actor can be useful if you're trying to track stats on things that aren't easily replicated or have some weird workarounds, such as the game state. The game state can't have arbitrary components added to it at runtime, so one thing you can do is add child actor components to your game state and then add this replication actor helper to help manage stats in a way that doesn't cause the network to freak out. Now, most people will not be needing this actor, but if you do want a standalone actor to manage stats, this is provided for you as well. And again, that's really all there is to it with the Stat Manager component. It doesn't have a lot of functionality other than that you can call get, set, and increment stats, and all the networking and everything else is handled for you. So that is the basic Stat Manager component.